Okay, let's get right into it. When you picture a goat, you probably think of a simple, kind of charming farm animal, right? But what if I told you they're living in a world filled with complex social ladders, strategic power plays, and some really surprising alliances? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the incredibly dramatic social lives of domestic goats, all based on a fascinating scientific study that watched their every single move.
And we're not just talking about some anonymous herd here. The researcher who spent months with these animals, A. Saram, saw what farmers have probably known forever. These are individuals. He actually identified distinct personalities. You have the provoker, who loves to stir up trouble, the glutton, and get this, even a silent alpha who rules the whole group without making a big scene about it.
So that's got to make you wonder, right? With all these different characters running around, how do they keep any kind of order? Is it just total chaos, or is there some kind of system that decides who gets to be that silent alpha and who gets stuck at the bottom of the pecking order?
Well, as you might have guessed, there is absolutely a system. It's not a free-for-all. It's a very clear social ladder, and just like in a lot of animal societies, it's all about establishing and then maintaining dominance.
Yeah, the study confirmed that goat societies are super structured. There is a definite ranking, from the top dog all the way down to the bottom. And this hierarchy controls everything: access to the best food, the comfiest resting spots, pretty much their entire quality of life. You can almost think of it like a corporate ladder, just, with a lot more headbutting.
So what is it that gives a goat its spot on that ladder? Well, it all comes down to their physical traits. But here's where it gets really interesting. The rules are surprisingly specific, and they change completely as a goat gets older. For the younger goats, we're talking 2 to 3 years old, it is all about bulk. The connection between their chest size and their rank is incredibly strong, a correlation of 0.879. To put it simply, being bigger and heavier is the clearest sign of a future leader. At this age, their weapons, their horns, they barely even factor into the equation.
But then, once a goat grows up and matures, the whole game just flips on its head. That focus on sheer size and weight gets replaced by something much, much more intimidating.
And look at this, the shift is just dramatic. For mature goats, body weight becomes almost irrelevant. Instead, horn length is the single biggest factor, with its link to dominance skyrocketing to an extremely strong 0.899. At this point in their lives, it's not about how big you are, it's about how big your weapons are.
Okay, so we know what makes a goat powerful. First its size, then its weapons. But how do they actually use that power in their day-to-day lives? This is where we get to see the real politics of the herd in action.
Now, scientists, of course, have a fancy term for all these power plays: agonistic behavior. This covers the whole shebang, from an all-out fight to just a subtle threatening look, or even one goat just staying out of another's way. But it's not always the brutal physical conflict you might be imagining.
You're probably picturing a yard full of constant, violent headbutting, right? But the data tells a totally different story. Almost half of all aggression involves no physical contact at all. It's just threats, posturing, and that's actually a brilliant strategy. You get to establish your dominance without the risk and the energy cost of a real fight.
And if you look at who's dishing it out versus who's taking it, well, the pattern is just crystal clear. High-ranking goats started 112 aggressive acts, but only received 8. The low-ranking goats, they started just 5 and got hit with 105. It is a total one-way street. Power and aggression flow downhill.
Now, this sounds pretty awful for the goats at the bottom of the ladder, doesn't it? I mean, they're constantly on the receiving end of threats, getting pushed away from food, just living a more stressful life. But the research found a really surprising twist in their social strategy.
And here's the amazing part. In a total reversal, the study found that the goats who were bullied the most were also the most social. They were the ones involved in the most friendly or affiliative interactions, things like grooming each other, rubbing up against one another, all that positive stuff. Since they couldn't fight for power, they built friendships instead, maybe as a way to cope with all that stress.
Okay, so we've got size, we've got weapons, and we've got social strategy. But there's one final, crucial piece to this whole puzzle: the physical environment itself. The stage where this all plays out matters a lot.
The setting for this social drama turned out to be incredibly important. When the goats were all confined together in a shed, it was like a pressure cooker. Competition was high, and aggression just skyrocketed as that hierarchy was constantly being enforced. But the moment you let those same goats out into an open pasture, the conflict almost completely disappeared. Finding food became way more important than fighting.
And the numbers here are just wow. They saw 982 social interactions inside the shed compared to a measly 8 out in the open pasture. That's not just a small change, that's a fundamental shift in their entire behavior. It just goes to show how much pressure being confined puts on these animals. Space, literally, equals peace.
So, after looking at all this data, the physics of power, the politics of aggression, and the huge impact of the environment, what are the big takeaways from this deep dive into the goat world? It really just boils down to 3 simple but really powerful rules. For the young ones, size is power. As they get older, weapons matter more. And for every single one of them, space is peace. These 3 rules pretty much govern the entire social structure of the herd.
And that's really the crucial point here. This research shows us that a goat's daily life is anything but simple. It's a constant, high-stakes game of physics and politics, where their safety and their well-being depend entirely on understanding and navigating these unwritten rules.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating final thought from science writer Ed Young. Our understanding is limited by the questions we even think to ask. This study asked what makes a goat society tick, and it uncovered this amazingly complex world. It just makes you wonder, what other intricate social dramas are unfolding all around us, in our own backyards and on our farms, just waiting for us to pay attention and ask the right questions?